Okay, let's dive into two sexual lifestyles that get talked about a lot, often in whispers. They're confused with each other constantly, but as we're about to see, they are two completely different worlds.
You've probably heard both terms, right? Cuckolding and swinging. And if you're like most people, you kind of assume they're, more or less interchangeable. It's a super common assumption, but it's also a huge misconception.
And look, if that's what you thought, you are definitely not alone. But we're about to break down exactly why they're so different, and we're going to use a little psychology and some real relationship science to get right to the heart of it. This analogy just hits the nail on the head. Think about it. Yeah, chess and poker both involve risk and strategy. But the rules of the game, the mindset you need, the power dynamics, the ultimate goal, they're completely different universes. So let's start right there. Let's clear up that big misconception by getting the fundamental architecture of these two lifestyles straight. Now this is really interesting because it lays out two totally different operating systems for a relationship. On one hand, you have swinging. It's all about symmetry, right? It's mutual, it's social, almost like a team sport. But cuckolding, it's built on a deliberate imbalance. It is intentionally asymmetrical, and it's deeply psychological. This isn't just a small difference. This is everything. Okay, so let's dig into swinging first. People who are in it often just call it the lifestyle. And the reasons couples actually decide to participate are probably not what you'd guess. So a lot of couples get into the lifestyle to deal with a real biological thing called the Coolidge effect. That's our brain's natural tendency to get less aroused by the same old thing over time. But it goes way deeper than that. Study after study shows that for many, it's about strengthening their own bond, forcing them to communicate better, and even finding a new social circle. And this right here just shatters the pop culture image, doesn't it? The reality is so much more, neighbor next door than some wild, hedonistic fantasy. We're talking about established, often suburban couples, a far cry from the cheesy key party stereotypes from the 70s. All right, let's shift gears completely and talk about cuckolding. This is a dynamic that is way, way more common as a fantasy than people realize, and it's also probably one of the most psychologically misunderstood kinks out there. So just look at that number for a second. 58%. What does that tell you? It tells you we are not talking about some fringe niche interest. According to the Journal of Sexual Medicine, a majority of men have had this fantasy. It's a mainstream psychological thing, and, believe it or not, there's a compelling scientific reason why. And that reason is something called sperm competition theory. This is the scientific key to the whole thing. It's this ancient, hardwired evolutionary response. Basically, when a male's brain perceives a rival, the body's entire reproductive system kicks into overdrive, creating this incredibly powerful wave of arousal and urgency. So what cuckolding does is it essentially creates a safe, totally consensual scenario that hijacks this powerful ancient system. The brain and the body respond to the perceived rival as if the evolutionary threat is 100% real, and that triggers an incredibly intense biological and sexual response. And this idea right here is the single most important psychological piece to get. For the person in the cuckold role, the feelings an outsider might see as negative, jealousy, feeling a little inadequate, those are the very feelings the brain recodes as intensely arousing. The discomfort is the point. And that brings us to what is, without a doubt, the most profound difference between these two lifestyles, how they relate to the incredibly powerful emotion of jealousy. Just look at this breakdown. In swinging, jealousy is a bug in the system. It's an obstacle you have to manage with rules and lots of communication so that everyone can have fun. But in cuckolding, jealousy isn't a bug. It's a feature. In fact, it's the very fuel that powers the entire engine. The goal isn't to get rid of it. The goal is to harness it. Okay, so putting aside all the sexual specifics for a minute, what can we learn from the people who actually navigate these incredibly complex dynamics successfully? What's the secret sauce? Well, it turns out the key to making any of this work has surprisingly little to do with sex and a whole lot to do with a crazy high level of communication. We're talking next-level skills here, things like metacognitive disclosure and real-time check-ins. These aren't your average communication skills. This is like black belt level emotional intelligence. And the research just screams this from the rooftops. Again and again, studies show that whether or not these relationships succeed has almost nothing to do with the non-monogamy itself. Success depends entirely on the foundation. Was there truly authentic consent? Is the communication top-notch? And did they do the emotional homework beforehand? So, The big point here isn't to say that these lifestyles are for everyone. They're definitely not. The point is to recognize what they can teach us. The tools you absolutely have to make them work, we're talking radical honesty, deep vulnerability, constant negotiation. Those are tools that can make any relationship stronger, monogamous or not.
And that kind of leaves us with one final big idea to chew on. Maybe, just maybe, these complex arrangements aren't really just about sex. Maybe the real story here is about the incredible courage it takes to build a relationship that's actually true to who you and your partner are, instead of who society tells you you're supposed to be.